Hello and welcome to Awakened with Lea, the next chapter. I'm your host, Lea, and this show is about bringing to the forefront diverse guests who have experienced adversity and major or minor transitions in life so that we can provide our viewers with courage, confidence, and tangible tools to navigate any challenge in life with the lived experience and wisdom of our guests. Hello and welcome to Awakened with Lea, the next chapter. I'm your host, Lea, and I am excited to be here and introduce everybody to Jacob Yoder. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks so much for having me, Lea.
So, Jacob, you are the founder of Natural Highs Recovery, and you are a sober coach.
That is correct. Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. So let me ask you, what adversity or challenge did you experience in life that deeply shaped who you are today?
Well, I would say out of the adversity that I've faced, a big struggle of mine was addiction. And it started pretty early in my life at age 14 with getting exposed to marijuana and getting quickly into a pattern of pretty heavy daily use of marijuana that led to, addictive patterns with other substances as well.
So, did you feel that there was some disconnect within yourself? Like, what was going on for you at that moment that led you to lean into those substances as a coping mechanism?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So for me, interestingly enough, I did not see it as something that I was using to cope until well into my recovery. Um, After getting clean and sober, looking back, I was able to start to see, and today I see very clearly that I was medicating some pretty severe anxiety. But at the time, I had no idea that's what I was doing. At the time, I just kind of saw it as really fun, feeling really good, and I didn't see a whole lot of negative consequences early on. So, I sort of just saw it as like this great thing that there was no reason not to do. And looking back, I think my reason for using was a little bit of both. I think it partly was fun and exciting at the time, but definitely also, I used way more than other people. I had, was one of the person doing it the most, and so I think the anxiety was always playing a role also.
And that's a really good point that you mentioned that you weren't. I mean, it makes sense at that age that, we all experiment and we're trying different things. But we don't have the awareness that it's a deeply rooted issue. So we just continue on doing our thing, doing, what feels natural to us. So it's amazing how much awareness plays a part in us breaking the chains of any type of addiction.
Yeah, it definitely is.
So, at what point did you notice that you were engaging more than the people around you?
I think that for a while I thought that doing it the most, having the most, being the guy who had enough weed for everybody, being the guy who had, who was throwing the parties, I could sell you the stuff, I could give it to you for free, I could, and so that was like cool, right? During that time in my life, it was like it was a cool, so I think that for a while I was striving to be that person. And I think that when it really started to click for me that this was uh, a problem, it started to click around I started my freshman year of high school. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was aware um, that this was maybe a little too much and I wanted to do less of it. And so at that point is when I kind of started to try and control my using. And it was another 3 years or so after that that I finally got clean. I was trying to find some kind of middle ground first, and that just wasn't the solution for me. Wasn't worth it, and wasn't really possible. Honestly, there's no middle ground for me when it comes to mind altering substances.
Yes,
I'm clear on that.
yeah, that's a very good point. It's a lot of us get fooled into thinking that that there is a middle ground, and part of addiction is that mental obsession and that physical need for once you start, and you can't stop. And that's not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it's almost like an allergy to the body, where we can't just stop. We do need support, and it's also, uh, I guess I would say, the realization, the acceptance, surrendering to the fact that um, it's there is no middle ground. It's a forever thing, right? So, how did the people in your life react when you were pulling back a little? Because it sounds like um, a lot of people pleasing, where it was like trying to fill a void of yours by being available to them, and surrounding yourself with um, being able to supply them.
Hmm. Such a good question, Leah. Thank you. I think that it was really scary for me, like, to think about changing, my identity in that way, like to get sober, to get clean. It was almost like, who am I if I'm not the guy with, the sometimes I joke, like I call my that part of myself the candy man, right? Like if I'm not the candy man with throwing the parties and all that stuff. And one surprising thing to about it was, honestly, I don't think that people that I was surrounded by at that time really, really cared as much as I might have been afraid that they would. You know, I think we're so, we think that, we have all these fears, right? And the fear is really a fear of change. But there were two kinds of people in my life at that time. There were people who, I really only connected with over smoking marijuana and, partying and that sort of thing. And those people didn't really turn out to be, people I necessarily needed to have or wanted to have. They weren't bad people, but there was no deeper connection necessarily there. And so when I made the decision for myself to get clean and sober, first of all, I was 19 years old at that time. So nobody else was doing that. But when I did make that decision, it was just sort of natural that, I don't really want to put myself in those environments anymore. And I don't necessarily feel a need to continue relationships with certain people that were in my life without the partying and the drinking and drugging being involved. Now, the other group of people in my life were people who, I love dearly, I have close connections with, and I didn't want the relationship or the connection to end. And, it can be scary if you do use with those people. You don't want that to take away from your connection. But what I found with that group is that it just doesn't matter. Like with that group, the actual friendship, the actual connection is so much deeper than just drinking together or smoking together. That, what, if that's a true friend, you're going to be able to connect over something else. It's going to open up a new path in your relationship. They might even be grateful that you guys aren't, that's not what you're doing all the time now. It might spur them to have some different experiences and adventures. So
That's an important message because there is the fear of losing people when we decide to get clean, and we realize along the way that what certain friendships were based on, and like you said, some were just about the substances, and some had more. It went deeper, those relationships. But what was it like at age 19? Because that's a difficult age when everybody's going out and partying, to separate yourself. And I'm sure there were a lot of emotions that came up for you. So at 19, um, what was it like, the hard parts? Because then I do want to follow with all of what you were able to embrace because of it. But at 19, what did that look like for you?
Well, honestly, you know, it was a pretty big change. I think that I just knew deep down I couldn't be the person that I wanted to be if I continued my behavior at that time. And it also got clear to me that I wasn't going to be able to find a middle ground with it, that there wasn't a middle ground that really even felt worth it. If let's say I forced myself to smoke like 1 or 2 days a week, first of all, I would always end up ramping it back up to every day or 5 days a week. But even in the in between periods, it was like so much effort to sustain that I ended up thinking, I'd rather just have a clear head. I'd rather not. I would literally rather not fog up my head at all than only do it 2 days a week and then deal with the consequences of that and then go through the transition back to a clear head and then back to a foggy head. It was just too much. And I think that actually, even though there were challenges, there was a lot of relief, honestly. Like it was scary, but when I took that step, I felt so much relief. I just felt so close to like what I would call spirit, or some people would call God or the universe. I just felt so close to that. Like the highest part of me was finally, no pun intended, the truly like my highest self, so to speak. I was finally letting it take charge and doing what that part of myself wanted me to do. And so actually, I didn't just end up stopping weed and getting sober. I actually started eating healthier and I actually reduced my caffeine intake. And all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, I'm just going to do what the healthiest part of me wants me to do. And I got swept up in a wave of that. And it was honestly like the first month of it was like one of the most incredible, exciting experiences of my life. And I've heard a lot of people report differently. I've heard a lot of people talk about this kind of what I'm talking about now, which is sometimes referred to as the pink cloud, like the pink cloud of recovery. It's so new and exciting. I've also heard a lot of people, severely struggle with the changes that are taking place. I think that stuff came for me a little bit after, when maybe the novelty wore off, and I was left realizing that I have some pretty severe anxiety that I didn't even know I was medicating. And so that for me has been the challenge, is learning the ways of dealing with that anxiety in myself, without those previous coping mechanisms of drugs and alcohol that I used to have. I think that's been the most challenging part.
And it's a very good point that you made about that each person is goes through that in their own way. So for you, it was all the exhilaration of not using the substances, and for others, they it comes later on, so they're going through certain emotions. But also the fact that it played out into other areas of your life where now you were eating healthier, and so you probably um, not only had the brain fog removed, but now you were nourishing your body to actually really think clearly, right?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
when you were saying no to going out, and I'm just circling back to that because I've spoken to a lot of people, and at that age, it was all about going out and partying. So when you made that decision for yourself that you are no longer going to engage in those substances, how did you cope with any emotions that came up for you when you were not accepting invitations to go out?
Yeah, I definitely, it's so important what you're talking about. Saying no became such a huge, important lesson in my life. How to say no, when to say no. I quickly realized that I didn't really have an interest in going to the same environments and just not drinking or smoking, you know? So, a couple times I tried, just going anyway to the party and just not drinking or smoking. But, what I found for me is that, like, honestly, there wasn't that strong of a reason for me to be there without the drinking and the drugs. Like, I just didn't, I would like, it wasn't, like, I felt like I could be spending my time a better way. And for me, that was, I had an interest and have a deep interest in nature, wilderness, mountain climbing. And I turned my attention to that. So I think when it's really important when you start to think about what you're saying no to, also think about each one of those no's is a yes to something else. So each time you say no is actually an opportunity of a yes to something else, and really being clear on what that is that you're saying yes to instead, I think is more motivating than just saying no.
Oh, I love that. That is a fantastic message. And it also sounds that you made this decision to not focus on what you were losing, or missing out on because you were not going to engage in using those substances, but you focused your attention on what can I do to make myself feel good? What is available to me? So you were opening up that door for opportunity as opposed to feeling sorry for yourself because all of a sudden you're not going to the bars, or you're not going to wherever it is, uh, people would go and party. And that's an important point, is because, wherever we focus our attention, that's what grows. And so it sounded like, because you decided to shift your attention to, one second, what do I love doing? So, you mentioned being in nature and all of those activities. So you didn't feel empty. You felt actually even more fulfilled because you were starting to learn about yourself and the things that you love to do and doing those things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember, in those early days, like, it would be 9 a.m. on a Sunday, and I would be like up on top of a mountain peak, having, gotten up early and gone out. And a lot of, I did a lot by myself. Like, some people have more or less comfort level with being by themselves. For me, I actually love being by myself. And at that time, it was a really great time to be by myself also. So, I would do things like that. And it would be 9 a.m. Sunday morning, and I'm at the peak of a mountain after like a 2 hour hike. And I remember thinking, every single one of my, friends for the most part is like hungover right now, like they're going to still be sleeping for another 3 hours.
Yeah.
And that, just that realization and how satisfying that is. And you get back at the time that everybody else is like waking up and starting their Sunday with a groggy head, and you've already had that experience. You start to realize what's possible in your life if you continue that pattern.
It's like, I want more of that. I want more of that, right? Now, a lot of people say that they feel lonely when they're by themselves. And then there's others that say, I'm most fulfilled when I'm by myself. So when you had those moments of being by yourself, what would you say was the best gift that you uncovered by having time with yourself?
I think the best gift was spending that time really practicing self-love and contentment and just learning to uh like I'm going to be okay, like I'm learn how to be okay with myself, by myself. And actually, and I had a realization at one point that when I'm alone, I don't feel like I'm by myself. I feel like I am with myself. And I think that that's what I cultivated during the time alone is I learned how to feel like I'm with myself rather than by myself.
Oh, I love that. That's a very strong message because even when we're in a group of people, we could feel lonely. So getting to know ourselves so that we can be with ourselves in moments where you go hiking or whatever activity it is for any of us. It's actually something to look forward to, not to fear, because a lot of people will stay in their comfort zone of doing the same thing over and over again because of fears of being alone and many other fears, I'm sure, as well. But that's what keeps us stuck in the same place, right?
Hmm.
So I want to circle back to when you made that decision to stop. And you said it was a 3 year period. How did you cope with the urges to use?
So you mean in between? Because I was basically high for like 6 years straight, smoking every day from 14 to when I was 19, almost 20. And so you mean when I started to try and find a middle ground, or do you mean when I actually stopped?
When you made this decision to completely stop?
Hmm. So when I made the decision to completely stop, I think one of the most important things is that I had been setting up my life for that decision for a period of time before that. So, I went to Narcotics Anonymous meetings stoned out of my mind. I went to 12-step meetings and started getting in that environment. I mean, I think the biggest um disservice, like I think the biggest misconception about quitting anything or about addiction in general is that it's about giving something up, like stopping something. It's not about stopping something. It is entirely about bring taking something in. It's entirely about adding things that make the old patterns unnecessary, undesirable, and unable to survive in you, basically. And it's not that, I didn't experience any cravings or desires, but by the time I stopped, I had enough support in my life. I had a 12-step group. I had hired a life coach. I had I told my mom, my sister, my dad, everybody around me. I was like sharing that part of my life with people that, hey, I'm getting sober. And by the time I actually stopped, I had so many people I could report back to, hey, I got a week clean, like, hey, I'm 2 weeks clean, 3 weeks clean. And that I think was what helped me the most with if cravings did come up, if desire did come up, it was like, no, I'm not gonna tell my mom and my dad and my sister and my friend Mark and my sponsor and my freaking entire 12-step group and my coach that I slipped up and used again, Like, no, you put those barriers in place between yourself and the substance. I got rid of everything out of my house. I think that the more barriers you put between you and just picking up again, the easier it is to not have those cravings really get into your head.
What I'm hearing is that you had such a strong intention and willingness, and you surrendered. to this whole idea of I've had enough. And when the intention's there and you're willing to open up to see a new reality, then it's like you said, you're not giving anything up. You're opening yourself up to a new reality. And I love that you put it out there that you didn't have to do it alone. You had support, and now support may look different for everybody, but you put yourself out there, you reached out so that you can have support and accountability, which is you were setting yourself up for success,
Mhm.
so that each way you turned, and you were realistic about knowing that there are going to be days that are not as desirable, and you had a full support system in order to be able to really fulfill that intention.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so important.
So then, at what point were you ready to address the anxiety that was being covered up for so long with the substances?
That's a good question. I think it actually took me about a year or two to even really reflect on that and fully understand how much anxiety I have as a person and things that are going on that I didn't have perspective on, like feeling different from other people, for example, feeling like there's things going on in my head or things that I'm thinking about that are just way different from where the rest of the world seems to be at. Like those kinds of things that caused anxiety and um those started to become more and more clear because I was no longer just covering them up with stuff. So after some time, I'd say, I started to recognize the wounding, and I'm still on that journey now. I mean, that's the beautiful thing. I mean, you get to start actually healing that stuff once you really know it's there, and the freedom of like I've had times where I'm like, I didn't know I could feel this free. I didn't know I could feel this peaceful. I just didn't know. I would not have been able to imagine the depth of some of those peaceful moments in sobriety. I wouldn't have been able to imagine that you could feel that good or that peaceful without some kind of drug. I just and I've been very pleasantly and surprised with in sobriety to find that as I follow um, multiple sources of support and take suggestions. It's really, to me, like I could not be on this journey alone. I didn't get myself into recovery alone. Like I reached out, but I was so supported by a family friend who was the first person to tell me, hey, try going to a meeting. And then the group that I met at that meeting, and I've you know stayed connected to various forms of support that have made this possible for me, and through, I think, working programs, investing in myself, that's what's allowed me to deal with the things that are kind of beyond just the sobriety. I think of sobriety now as a sort of starting point, like it's a starting point of a much larger well-being journey. And so, yeah, mine is definitely still going.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a journey. And that's also an important point, because, we are constantly changing and evolving. And as we go through this journey, it's the willingness to be open to evolve with it. So, we learn, and we play in that new learning, and we figure out more things about ourselves, and what we like and what we don't like, and we give ourselves permission to get to know ourselves, and to be able to have that self-compassion and patience to learn new coping skills, and fill our soul with all these positive new emotions, because it's like you said, it's not just about getting sober, it's are we emotionally sober as well. And that's where the deeper work comes in, where you've had all these beliefs for so long, whether it's like you didn't fit in, or what you had mentioned, and then all of a sudden it's like we're trying to challenge those beliefs because they weren't exactly working for us, not to mention chances are they were not true, because we're influenced, our beliefs are influenced by others. They're, it's family and teachers and this, the society as a whole. And we just believe these things that we've adopted as to be true, and we don't even think twice about it until something like this occurs, and we start to question it. And that's where the whole acceptance piece comes in, where we get rid of all those stories that we've been telling ourselves for so many years. And we actually get so in tune with ourselves, our inner selves, where we that's how we work through it. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did too, because you're at this peaceful place right now, and you're not taking any drugs to control the anxiety. You are literally looking within. If you could talk more about the specifics about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything you just mentioned is so true, and so important. And for me, yeah. So I went into therapy this year. Like, I had lots of other support that I explored before that, and lots of things that have been really helpful. And I went into therapy. I have never taken medication for my anxiety. And so, I totally, I want to acknowledge that it is a potential, aspect of recovery that, for some people, it might be, totally the right call to have pharmaceutical assistance with mental health. For me, I've been able to, for me, that I view that as like a last resort, just because of complications that could arise, and because I know I'm so prone to addiction. So I've put a lot of effort into what you said, going inside, and also just honestly, like the things that make me feel good. And that's kind of what natural highs is about, like climbing, wilderness. These days, I ride my mountain bike, and that's what I've been doing more than any other sport. As I live in Santa Cruz now, so it's kind of like surfing, mountain biking is a bigger thing here. Um, and then climbing is a little bit further away in the Sierras. But uh, I think that for me, meditation, a simple meditation practice in terms of in terms of going inside myself for reflection and for healing the internal level. Meditation has been extremely helpful, and I've taken it in very small bites. I've taken on a meditation practice as easily as possible, because I struggle to sit still. I'm a yang person. I'm a yang person who has too much yang and needs to learn the yin. So in meditation, I started with a 10-minute a day practice, and I had support from my life coach at the time to start meditating 10 minutes a day. And her recommendation to me, which I still do to this day, was sit in direct sunlight if you can. Sit facing the sun with your eyes closed, in direct sunlight. Do your meditation that way for just 10 minutes a day. And there was nothing else to it. Like, there's no, like, you try to be in a comfortable position, you try to sit upright, but there's no like big production. There's no like, okay, you need candles and a meditation. But for me, it was so much more accessible that way. Like, just close your eyes in the sunlight and focus on your breathing for 10 minutes a day. I'm like, okay, I can do that, you know? And that it's amazing. It's amazing what just that can do because it breaks the pattern that we otherwise might spend your whole day in. And I started to learn that there was another place I could go internally. And I think that I get that meditative experience also doing some of the more yang things. I think of climbing as like a perfect balance of yin and yang, but it also depends what kind of climbing you're doing. Mountain biking, pretty yang, but it's also very meditative when you're going. You know, like when I'm going down. Just the other day, here's an example. I was riding my mountain bike at night, and I like to do night rides because there's no one else out on the trail. I have a high powered light for my helmet, and I went up, you know, riding about an hour up the mountain, and I'm in the woods alone in the dark, and I was at the point where I was going to start going down. And so, you know, you ride up for an hour, you get to go down for about a half hour, 40 minutes of winding down on the trails, and at that point it's more passive because, you know, you're not putting the output anymore, you have gravity on your side. So I stopped and I did a prayer at the top of the mountain. I did a little meditation and a prayer. And what I asked for was, help me be present. Help me be completely present on the ride down. And I just took that moment to tap into my little meditation practice. You know, I'm no expert meditator, but I tapped in my little meditation practice, and I was able to shift my mind in that moment and just access this state of deep presence. I said, I don't want to have, because my mind had been cluttered, it had been cluttered the whole ride up, cluttered, cluttered, cluttered. And I said, you know, I'm in this forest. I have 45 minutes of sweet freaking downhill ahead of me. And I do not want mental clutter. And I just asked, I said, help me be present for this ride down. And it worked. You know, it worked. And that's the amazing thing. I went from a state of anxiety to tapping into peace. And then I got on my bike, and the whole ride down, that's what I kept coming back to. It was a meditation while I was on my bike. The thoughts would come up again occasionally, and I would say the same thing, help me be present, help me come back, and I would shift back, and I was wide awake, you know, on that bike, just really experiencing the downhill ride. So that ability to uh, at will to clear mental clutter and almost make a choice and return to center, so to speak, is so powerful because it made my whole downhill ride so much more enjoyable, you know. And otherwise I tend to feel like if I can't get out of my head, I'm sort of missing things in my life, you know. I'm sort of missing, like, I'm not fully there for the experience otherwise.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like with all the awareness that you gained, it allowed you to make these conscious choices. And I can only imagine the things you discovered on that way down just by being present. It is a very fulfilling um, uh, journey when we're in the present moment. We recognize things that we may not have recognized before. But I also like what you said about the meditation, that there's no right or wrong way to do it, and keeping it simple where it feels good for us, then we're more likely to engage in it. We're more likely to give it a try, because a lot of times we are influenced by, it needs to be done this way, it needs to be this long, and we start to question, are we doing it, we're focusing more on are we doing it right than actually being present in the moment, to say, I'm going to just close my eyes for 10 minutes, I'm going to breathe for 10, whatever works for each individual. And so I really like that you made that point, because there is no right or wrong. And it's about keeping it simple and what works for you, because then you're more likely to make it a long term, sustainable habit that you incorporate. And it all sounds like it's doing the trick for reducing your anxiety. Now, of course, it does not substitute anybody going and seeking medical advice. And then once the doctor and you make that decision, then it's about what you can do, what's in your control to be able to manage the anxiety. And that's exactly what you've done, which is amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been huge for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Um, so for anybody that is thinking about getting sober, what would be, I'm sure you have many valuable suggestions, but just to start, what could you put out there for anybody who is at the stage where, like you said, where you knew that you were doing it more than you would like to have been doing it, but the thought still of never doing it again is just too scary. So, what advice can you give to somebody that is really considering it, but they just don't know what to do first?
My advice to someone at that point would be, I would say the change starts before the addiction ends. The change starts before the addiction ends. So do what you can, little by little. Start to explore the pathways of what might be possible for you without the addiction. You don't have to stop fully in order to start the recovery journey. I think it's really important to let people know that. You got to get recovery. Like I said, I went to 12 step meetings stoned. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop using. I would go to, I would tell someone, check out a meeting, just check it out. Uh, Check out more than one. Don't judge it based on one meeting that you go to on one given night of one given group, you know, uh, and look for other recovery support methods that work, that look appealing to you. There's so many different meetings and groups on Instagram. I have a Facebook group, um, you know, the Natural Highs community. There's so many. There's for sober moms, there's for sober men, there's for sober women, there's everything. And so start finding what is appealing and put it in place little by little before you stop the addiction. Um, and then just remember also, of course, I'll drop the classic line, just for today. It is only ever a one day at a time thing. I still come back to that so often, like probably every day I connect back to that viewpoint of all I got to do is get through today. It's just one day at a time.
Absolutely. And that's a great message. It's too overwhelming to think about the rest of our lives. So it's just for today. And it's also scary and overwhelming at the thought of we have to do it all right now. No, it's a process. So the first step is, like you said, it's a desire. So when you go into the rooms, first of all, you're welcomed by people like no other way, because they get you. They get you. They've all been there, and they're still on their journey. So it a lot of people say, like, it's like you feel like you're at home. And the desire is where we need to start. And that is I mean, pre-COVID, you would go into a room and, having the desire, you would pick up a desire chip. And that starts the momentum of that desire, and it's like, wow, you just it really it shifts the energy, and it's a starting point. And that's all we need to think about right now is the starting point. We don't need to think about anything else. And then, like you said, which I also loved, you may not get excited from one meeting that you went to. Just don't give up. Keep going to different ones. You'll find people that you resonate with, and you'll just know. You'll know when you feel like you're at home, and that might change again too. So just being open to possibilities, and the learnings that will come your way, and the knowledge, and allowing yourself to evolve from there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what would you say was, um, you don't have to tell us all of them if you don't want to, but what beliefs did you need to shift in order to move forward?
I think I think I had to believe that sobriety could be a lot of fun. I think I had to probably uh, shift a belief about my value. I think I had to shift the belief that, I don't have anything to offer. Let's say one of my fears was like I don't have anything to offer if I'm not the guy that, has a big bag of weed. So I had to shift some beliefs about my own value and believe that I am valuable. I have more to give with a clear head, and sobriety can be really fun and adventurous.
And that those are exciting words, because when at first it's scary to shift our beliefs because they're comfortable, and to step out of that comfort zone and believe something that we're not quite sure about, and we're doubtful of, um a lot of times can keep us in our comfort zone. So I love how you're expressing, by shifting your belief, it actually opened you up to wonderful uh, opportunities, and you weren't looking at things as problems. You were looking at things as, oh, what, like, it's like what was coming to you, and all these wonderful feelings, and feeling fulfilled. And you started to actually learn your values, and start to live life, that's aligned with your values. So, I mean, these are wonderful gifts of sobriety, and that's a key point. We the adversity that we've experienced, um, they're gifts, and it's very hard to understand that until we get into the rooms and we speak to others who have experienced what we experienced, and realize that they're gifts because they do help to bring us to a point of getting to know who we are and who we want to be. And it sounds very clear that that's the path that you've been on. Yeah. So we're almost out of time, but what would you say was the most significant lesson that you learned in life that has led you to your next chapter?
The most significant lesson, I think, for me, at least right now, the most significant lesson I've learned is patience. And I am still learning it. But patience has been a huge lesson for me because it has allowed me to learn how to hold out for long-term rewards instead of immediate rewards. So it's learning how to reap the benefits of delayed gratification instead of instant gratification. For me, being patient really was what I needed to learn in order to start doing that.
And that is a very deep message because we all want instant gratification. And it's, yeah, you're not alone in that. And so we would typically react to certain circumstances in order to fulfill that need right now. But the key word is what you said, is to reap the benefits of having the patience, because then what really comes our way is aligned with what we actually really want, as opposed to, by default, reacting, not responding to whatever the situation is, and then wondering why it didn't turn out the way we wanted it to turn out. So I thank you for that beautiful message and for all your beautiful messages. I really do believe that anybody listening to us, listening to you, will really be able to have a much better understanding of the rewards of sobriety.
Well, thank you, Leah. I hope that is the case. And I really appreciate you for holding a space and being the hostess of something that allows these messages to get out. It's so important.
Thank you very much. And I thank you for your courage, for and willingness to be able to share your personal experiences with us in hopes to support others. So thank you very, very much.
You're so welcome.
Thank you. And to all my viewers, thank you for being here. And I look forward to sharing this space again with you next time.